Hello everyone, Cannon here again. For this week's lesson, we're going to take a look at intervals, the spaces between the notes essentially. I'm going to show you a short chord melody piece I've come up with, which features both harmonic and melodic intervals, and then I'm going to explain what that means, break it down, show you how it works, and show you how you can apply it to your own playing. I'll also go over some basic ear training concepts so you can learn to recognize them. Hope you dig it. Okay, before we dive into the full chord melody piece, I'm just going to go over some basic intervals that you might already be familiar with just to kind of start off on a fundamental footing. First we have the oh so exciting unison, which is just the same exact pitch. We have its cousin the octave, which is the same pitch in the next octave. We have the fifth, which you're probably familiar with from power chords. And then we have the third, which you're probably familiar with from major and minor chords. Those major and minor chords getting that major or minor quality from the quality of the third. Either a major third or a minor third. And you hear it in the full chord, major, minor. Okay. The first chord we're going to encounter is going to be an E minor add 9, or as I like to think of it, the Pink Floyd chord. Yes, that's just what I associate it with personally. The main thing that is unique about this chord is that 9 that's right in the title. It's the second note in the scale, but in the upper octave, so it's... And because it's a full E minor add 9, you still have the third, which means you end up with this interesting half-step interval, that minor second, between the 9 and the third. Gives it a very eerie and mystical sound on top of the already dark sound of a minor chord. Okay, the next measure features an augmented chord. Now what that means is you're taking the fifth of a chord, in this case G, it would be the D, and you're raising it by one half step, which gives it a kind of tense and mystical feeling similar to the 9 chord from before in a different way. This measure also features a G sus2 with the sharpened fifth. That is basically combining the quality of the 9 from before with the quality of the augmented chord. And when you throw the D in the root, which is the actual fifth, you get a very, very tense sounding chord. You can have a lot of fun trying to come up with interesting intervals to manipulate an existing chord. You get a lot of fun stuff out of it. On to the next measure, we come to the wonderfully exciting G5 with a D in the root, if that's what you want to call it, which is temporarily suspended with a sus2. You'll often hear stuff like that. It just adds some tension, and much like the name implies, it adds some suspense that wants to resolve somewhere. Next we find ourselves with a D7, which features a minor seventh interval. It sounds nice and pretty enough on its own. The reason it is a dominant 7 and not a minor 7 is because we still have a major third. And we temporarily suspend that third to a second to again add some movement. From there we go to an A sus2 with no fifth, so up to an E sus4, which is now the first sus4 we've encountered. Which, as you can imagine, involves a fourth instead of a second, like the suspended 2s do. This next measure, we find ourselves with a good old trusty B minor. This particular inversion with the old D in the root. And then down to a D add 9. Again, that ninth is a wonderful mechanism for movement. Next chord of note, or rather the next interval of note, is a sixth, a major sixth to be exact, which is put on top of a regular old A minor chord. Sixth, minor seventh, octave. And the way I'm voicing it is like this. That moves up to another voicing of A minor 6 as well. Next we come to our first major 7th interval, which when you put it into its major 7th chord, makes this wonderful chord. Has a very open and inviting and yet somewhat exotic still sound to it, more than just your standard old C. Just a little bit more interesting. The next chord is a diminished chord, which is just built by stacking minor thirds on top of each other. This is the direct cousin to the augmented chord from before, which is built by stacking major thirds on top of each other. Diminished with minor thirds, augmented with major thirds. I should briefly touch on the difference between melodic and harmonic intervals. It's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, melodic intervals are those you'll find in a melody, a sequence of notes, for example, with G, root, major third, fifth. Now, if you harmonize all those together and apply them to a chord, you end up with a G chord, which is the same intervals applied harmonically instead of melodically. Okay. Now, as far as ear training goes, the thing that I always found the most helpful was to find intervals within songs that you already know. I pointed out the Star Wars interval in last week's lesson, which is a fifth. It's a fifth. You also have things like Somewhere Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz, as silly as an example that is. That's a good example of an octave. Somewhere over the rainbow. You have the famous Jaws theme music, the da-da-da-da, which is a half step, a minor second. So try to find some ways, some songs that you know, or some quirky theme songs like I'm pointing out, that you can use to associate the intervals with. Alrighty then, that should just about sum it up for this lesson on intervals. I hope I was able to show you them in context and how they work and what some of their different qualities are in those contexts, and I hope you're able to use what I've talked about to apply it to your own playing and writing. I also hope that you dive right into that quirky but fun ear training that I was talking about, which can be so helpful in all different areas of music, being able to just grasp different intervallic relationships as you hear them. As always, I hope you had fun, and thanks again.